Hi, I'm Daniel Burke, and today I'm going to teach you how to make the best pork ribs you've ever had using the 3-2-1 method. Pork ribs doing the 3-2-1 method. The 3-2-1 method is all about cook time. Each of those numbers has to do with a number of hours in a particular way to cook those ribs. Now on a smoker at about 225 degrees, there's the 3, the 2, and the 1. I'm going to explain what that means to you. 3, meat side up, laying down in the smoker with the rub on them for 3 hours. You're going to spritz it every 45 minutes or an hour or so, but that's the 3 hours. When it comes to 2, we'll remove the ribs. We're going to put them in some foil with some savory ingredients we'll talk about, and we're going to wrap them nice and snug, put them back on the smoker for 2 hours and let them simmer in those juices. The 1 is for that final hour. We're going to take them back out, put them back on the smoker outside of the foil with the meat side up once again, and this time we're going to coat those ribs carefully in your favorite barbecue sauce for that final hour until that barbecue sauce caramelizes and you're eating the best ribs you ever had. So usually this involves a temperature of about 225 with the meat side up. Now recommendations for charcoal and for wood, I'll use a chimney full of lump charcoal and generally smoke ribs with apple wood. Really any fruit wood will do. Sometimes I'll mix apple and hickory. You can also mix in some pecan. You can do pecan all on its own. Some call it pecan depending on the part of the country you're from. Hey, if all you have is post oak or some kind of oak from your brisket, that's okay. That's gonna turn out just fine. All right, let's talk about the trim and the rub. The easiest way to do this is go ahead, get a couple of racks of St. Louis cut ribs. When you get St. Louis cut, they're already trimmed and cut down in a way that's perfect for making these ribs. I'm not talking about baby backs. That's a completely different type of rib from a different part of the animal. That's not what we're doing here. Now, St. Louis cut are different from your untrimmed pork spare ribs that are a lot bigger. Now that's a good way to save some money if you're going to trim them yourself, but it takes time and you're going to need a strong enough knife like I have to really cut through and navigate around those big bones. It'll take more than a boning knife to do that. So for your first time, especially if you've never done this before, just go ahead and get a couple of racks of St. Louis cut ribs. If you buy a pack at Costco, it usually comes with 3 ribs, but just plan accordingly. Now, when it comes to trimming, there's just a couple of things, especially on St. Louis, because they've already been pre-trimmed. Some people will cut off the ends to make it look more uniform. I tend not to do that because this isn't about a competition. I don't care if they look perfect and pretty. We're going to eat these things. Other than cutting down a little bit of thickness and some fat, or some protruding pieces that are going to burn, there's not a whole lot of trim to be done. Now, one thing I will do is go ahead and peel off that membrane on the back here. I usually do this by putting a knife in just to pick it up a little bit off of the meat so that I can grab onto it and then pulling it. You can usually get it in one pull. I wear gloves when I handle meat, so it's a lot easier for me to grab the membrane, but some people will find it helpful to use a paper towel as well. Let's talk about this membrane a little bit. Contrary to what you might read on a bunch of blogs or videos, if you don't remove the membrane, it's not a big deal. I'll tell you this, in fact, every restaurant that you've been to more than likely left that membrane on. When they're cooking that many ribs, they don't have the time to remove it. So you've probably had ribs already with the membrane on if you've eaten at any restaurant. This is not a life or death situation cutting off the membrane. But since we're at home and I'm using an offset smoker, I'm gonna go ahead and pull it off. If I was using a barrel smoker and hanging them on hooks, I would actually leave it on just to make those ribs a little less likely to fall apart towards the end of the cook. What a disaster that would be. Okay, so not a lot of trim, and once we've done that, it's time to apply a rub. You can use your favorite rub recipe. There are many options. I'm actually including a few rub recipes so you can make it from home at the link below. Let me say this about rubs. A lot of these rubs will have a lot of sugar. If you're flaring up to high temperatures, you might want a rub that doesn't have a lot of sugar. Guess what? I'll include a recipe just like that for you. If you're not sure where to start, Kansas City rubs tend to have a lot of sugar in them, brown sugar. The Memphis style rubs tend to have much less brown sugar or none. And any kind of a Texas style rub, there's generally not any brown sugar in that, though you never know. So for this recipe, any rub is fine. Just remember, if you have one that has a lot of brown sugar in it, or if you bought one and it's talking about Kansas City on there, just watch your temperatures. Make sure they're not spiking up. The reason we talk about temperatures is that because there's a lot of sugar, it has a propensity to burn. And if you're burning it, especially in this early phase of the cook, you're gonna end up with a burnt sugar taste, kind of like when you put a marshmallow in the fire and it catches fire, and you end up with that burnt marshmallow taste. That's going to be on your ribs. I have sufficiently warned you now about the burnt sugar. Now, when putting on the rub, I'm going to use a binder. I'm going to recommend you go ahead and use mustard. You can use olive oil. With the Kansas City rubs, because of the sugar and the moisture, you may not even need a binder, but I always go ahead and use one anyways. You can even use hot sauce, but you're just going to lather it on. And here's a tip. When you're lathering that stuff on, start with the meat side down and the bone side up when you put the mustard on. You're going to put that mustard on first, evenly. You're going to go ahead and put down your rub across the entire back side of it. The reason we started that way is because now that you flip it over when you're done and you're going to apply the mustard again to the other side, you don't have to flip it back over, and that sucker is going to be ready to put on the smoker just as it is. Now, this isn't brisket, this is pork. So I wouldn't leave these out long. If you haven't started your fire yet, if you have some other things to do, go ahead and put them in the fridge the way that they are. It's okay. They're going to heat up pretty quick. They're thin. There's not a lot of fat on these. There's not even that much meat on these, so they're going to heat up quickly in that smoker. You don't want to leave them on the counter for long. 15 minutes, that's fine, but you don't want to do that. You certainly don't want to leave them out in the sun, especially here in Texas. Okay, so 3-2-1 method. Let's talk about phase one, the 3. Once you've got the temperature, you've got the smoke you want, you're going to go ahead and you're going to put those ribs on the smoker. Now, a small backyard smoker generally can fit about 2 racks of ribs on that. You'll do it the long way, not side by side, so you can only fit 2 on a smaller smoker like we've got here. If there's an end of the ribs that's a little bit thicker, go ahead and put that end facing the firebox. It'll just absorb a little bit more of the heat and won't dry out as quick. I also always use a water pan when I'm cooking ribs. There's not a lot of fat and moisture in them already, so that water pan that's in your firebox is going to help out a lot. For ribs, I'll spritz them about every 45 minutes or so, maybe every hour. We're probably closer to 45 minutes. Apple cider vinegar, or you can use an apple cider vinegar and apple juice mix if you've got that. You could use just apple juice. People use all sorts of things. You want to be careful you're not ruining your spray bottle. If you have water, that's fine. But you're going to go ahead and do that for 3 hours, and as you see it, that bark is going to kind of set in towards the end of that 3 hours. 3-2-1 method. All right, once the ribs have been on about 2.5 hours, it's time to prepare for the next phase. You're going to lay out a large sheet of foil. I use heavy duty foil, it tends not to break. You really don't want the foil to break here and for things to be leaking out because you want to keep all those juices in. You can use 2 sheets of foil if you think that's better. If you've never done this before, this part's about to blow your mind. You're going to start out by laying out your piece of foil. On top of that foil, you're going to put 4 to 5 pats of butter. Then you're going to cover the length of where the ribs are going to be with brown sugar again. And there's a recipe here for how much to use and all that. It'll be down at the links below. After you put down that brown sugar, you're going to drizzle some honey on here, all the way across, back and forth, the length of where that ribs will be once you put them in the foil. If you've got some old honey that's solidified because it's been sitting in your pantry too long and your wife won't let you throw it out, this is a good opportunity for you to use that. So you've got the butter, the brown sugar, and the honey. And now it's time to drizzle some apple juice there. So make sure you might want to fold up the sides of the foil just a little so it doesn't drip out. Once you've got that mixture laying there, you're going to remove a rack of ribs carefully. I'll use my long old hickory knife. It runs the length of the ribs. And I'll wear a glove or use a towel to hold the other end so it doesn't slip off. And then you'll carefully place the ribs meat side down on top of that mixture, okay? So it's just laying on top of all that sweet goodness that you put on there. Here's the trick. Everything you've put down on the foil already, you're going to repeat that on the bone side of that same rack of ribs. You're going to double up, baby. Now carefully wrap up the ribs and put them back on the smoker, meat side down, wrapped up in the foil. And you're going to do that for both racks of ribs, and you're going to leave them there for 2 hours. So 2 hours have gone by, and we are now at the end of that phase. So you want to carefully put on some gloves or use some towels and pull those foil pieces. I use a long foil pan to put them in, disposable pan. You can use any kind of baking pan or cookie sheet, but you want something that'll be able to hold some liquid, because man, when you open up that foil, there's going to be a lot of juices in there that can run all over if you're not careful. Pick those up off of the smoker, put them right into that pan, and carefully unwrap them. And however you got them off the smoker, you're about to put them back on. I'll use my old hickory. I'll flip it up and just set them right back on there, one after the other. I might flip them around at this point so that the end that was facing the firebox for the first 3 hours is now switched to the other side. For this final hour, you're going to want to grab a silicone brush or a paintbrush, whatever you've got, even if you've got a squirt bottle, and you're going to coat evenly the entire top meat side of those ribs. And you're going to leave it on there for the next hour. You go ahead and keep that temperature low, again, especially if you're using a really sweet sauce like we tend to do for these kind of ribs. And for the next hour, that sauce is going to caramelize, and it is going to be awesome, man. You are almost to the end to having the greatest ribs you've ever had in your life. The time has come. Your ribs are ready. That final hour is done. You've done 3, 2, 1, and now it's time for the payoff. You want to carefully remove those ribs from the smoker and put them in your pan or whatever you've got to move them inside. You're gonna let them rest for about 15 minutes, and now it's time to cut these ribs up and serve them on a platter. This is where having a thicker, solid slicing knife like we've got here with the old hickory pays off, because when you're cutting down, no matter how hard you try to aim it to do it properly, you're gonna cut into some bones. And a big thick knife like this, even though it's sharp and it's got a good edge on it, it will just roll right off the side. You won't damage it. You can't really do a lot to hurt these things. Look at the bark on these things. Look how it's glazed. You can almost taste it right now, can you? Well, you can't, but I can. Best ribs you'll ever have. Hey, thanks for watching. I hope you enjoyed these ribs and these recipes. Please subscribe at the link below. We'd love to see you back for the next video.